All right, good evening, everyone. Let's call to order the meeting of the Committee on Housing, Planning, and Development. We have with us all committee members, as well as, more than that, we've also got 3 other members of council. So, and to refresh our memories, the members of the committee are Council Vice President Keppel, Councilman Schachtner, and myself as chair, me as chair. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the January 30, 2023 Housing Planning and Development Committee meeting. Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, so let's move to now consider the one item on our docket, which is proposed ordinance 7-2023, an ordinance to, let me skip some legal verbiage, to amend sections 1121.09A, single-family maximum lot area coverage, and 1123.09A, single and two-family maximum lot coverage, and 1133.06, conversion of the single-family structure prohibited by the codified ordinances of the City of Lakewood in order to update those provisions. Now, this has been, this is on second reading now, and is pending not only in front of this committee, but also the Planning Commission, which has yet to meet on the topic. Will meet this month or next month, Director? May 4th. Okay, so coming right up. So my intention tonight is to simply begin a discussion, get educated as council members on the topic, have some opportunity in a publicly noticed meeting for the city council members to deliberate a little bit, but not to hold a motion tonight. If there's a clear desire to amend a provision by one or more of the members of the committee especially, we could entertain that. But I don't come tonight with anything more than an interest in beginning a discussion about an important topic, about a pretty significant proposal. And I see there's some members of the public here to join us in the conversation, at least one. And there are 2 public comments on our electronic comments that we can get to. Both of those opposed. So we'd like to learn more about the topic, the proposal, and the public input here. And then also some of the Planning Commission, although the answer to the Planning Commission is we don't know what we don't know until after the May 7 meeting. Council members, any opening comments? Mr. Schachtner?
Yes. Thank you. I think that was a good way to set up the conversation. As members of council and administration know, this is something that I've been working with planning department in starting a conversation, moving things along since 2020, even 2019 in conversations with the planning department. And the reason being is that, look, you're not going to solve every issue that exists in terms of housing availability. You're not going to solve every issue in terms of parking. You're not going to solve every issue in terms of, did I say affordability already? And yeah, aging in place and providing opportunities to find places for people to live. What you can do is try to make some policy changes that can cause some investment and cause some people that have the wherewithal or ideas an opportunity to create space for themselves, for their loved ones, or for other people that seek to be residents and join our community. As written now, the ordinance, and I don't see that there's any rush in terms of this. It's not something that is of urgent matter. It's something that has been talked in public settings through previous housing committee meetings, some that I've chaired, some that Mr. Bullock have chaired. It has been talked. It was presented as an option from the Resiliency Task Force and discussed thoroughly when that task force was meeting and doing their research and through their presentation. What I see is a need for other housing products. For some, for example, when I talk to residents, they have loved ones, either parents that are aging or family members that may have trouble living on their own, and they want to create a space for them, or they want to create more space in their own home. They found barriers in terms of being able to expand on their own property and creating additions. And that is why there's that 35%, raising the coverage from a 25% to 35% on the principal area. That'll allow for a lot of first floor additions that wouldn't be allowed earlier, even though there's the space in the setbacks. Also have that provision that's basically saying you cannot create the next page. Whoever's controlling it, Tom, can you go to page 2 real quick? Thanks.
I'm learning.
Yeah, about the conversion of single-family structures prohibited. Now, altering to accommodate more than one family. We're talking about multifamily districts here. I mean, there was times have changed. There was a period of time here in Lakewood when we were offering grants and things like that for people to convert doubles into singles. And as a result of that, you saw a loss in the housing supply, and as an effect, costs go up because supply went down. This just kind of allows to reverse that trend and opens up, around 6,000 homes that are in multifamily districts that are single-family homes. Some other things that this, as currently written, the ordinance doesn't do, which I would like to enter into the conversation of something that we may consider. For example, right now, it doesn't allow for detached accessory dwelling units. This would, as written, only allow expansion of the principal structure, wouldn't allow a separate structure. And I think that's something to be debated, both the pros and the cons. For example, a fix to that, because currently, in addressing one portion, which is the, if you go, the principal building.
Do you want me to go?
Yeah, that's fine. That just right there is fine, including attached decks and run. There's another provision, which is provision C, which talks about an accessory structure. And an accessory structure, as written now, shall not cover more than 25% of the area of the rear yard. I would propose changing that also to 35%. Allow coverage for 35%. And on top of this, we currently have a requirement in Ordinance 1143.05, which talks about parking requirements. And in all residential districts, whether it be R1 and their low, medium, and high density, and R2 districts, all require a space shall be in a garage. Now, I see the intent of that. We want people to park off the street as much as possible, to provide on-street parking for people. But I don't see requiring a space in the garage. Actually, the behavior of our residents I'd be surprised if a majority actually park in their garages, whether they're, depending on the year they were built. For the majority of the garages here in Lakewood are too small to fit your supplies in storage and to allow for a vehicle inside it. So eliminating that requirement would allow for accessory structure to be in place of a garage. Still, people could park in their driveways and through the back leading up to the area. There's only a prohibition from parking in the front of your home, which I agree with, but that doesn't mean, with the percent that we're expanding, maybe we could allow for more parking area in the back of people's homes if they prioritize more of having another dwelling structure on their property. And that's all good for debate in terms of what it makes the neighborhood look like, what effects it will have, and if that's what we want to see in Lakewood. But I think it should be a part of the conversation for good or for bad. And I'm sorry that I'm talking for longer than usual, but I do have one more item to talk about, and that is if we were to do detached accessory dwelling units, whether it be a permitted accessory use or a conditional use. Difference is one would be plainly just by right, and of course, both Director Leininger and Councilman Baker, who was a former chair of the Planning Commission, could correct me. But I do believe the main difference between a permitted accessory use and conditional accessory use is that a conditional accessory use would have to go in front of the Planning Commission prior to BZA. That was planning, maybe both. It's Planning Commission, right? Sorry, it's okay. Planning Commission prior to being permitted, which would provide another layer of oversight in terms of those types of units. Oh, is that what I sound like? That's awful. Now, so that's what I want to kick it off. This is not a rush to change the zoning code. This has been deliberative and, by my standards, slow. That's not a criticism. That's a good thing sometimes. I'm trying to not use as many council words like robust or deliberative so much in my vocabulary anymore. But I look forward to the conversation, the education, and the and really figuring out what these will look like in our community and how we can do it. So.
Thanks, Mr. Schechner. Let me ask a couple clarifying questions to make sure I understand. But before I do that, the traffic, or time copying this. So we've got until 7:30. So we have ample time to have council discussion. What I want to also do is make sure we have time for the public who's here to hear their comments clearly and understand their views of the issue, and if there's support for it, understand the basis for that. If there's opposition, understand the basis for that, so that going forward we have that much more depth of understanding. So we'll be sure to do that. We're in the first phase of the discussion here where we're talking amongst ourselves. So thank you all for bearing with us. So if I hear you correctly, Councilman Schechner, a couple things. First, it sounds like you and the administration have worked quite a while in developing, incubating an approach, a potential approach to a mix of issues here. This is the first draft. It sounds as if you envision a potential amendment to expand what's before us here to add another provision that could do what? Now, I've missed what you said. Was it having to do with parking or detached structures or some mix of both?
I'll clarify. I would say that, and I'll be transparent, frank. There's a differing in opinion, and both have good points to them. I mean, there's one side that says like, hey, we're a densely populated area. Let's do attached, and I don't want to misstate the position of anybody, but this is just how I view the difference in opinion, is that there's a school that say, we could keep it simple, we'll do attached, and people could expand their principal basis, but we'll still have garages. We're not going to have another structure on a property that won't have as big an impact on potential on-street parking issues. But there's another school that says like, hey, if I have the property and I happen to own enough property for the setbacks and things like that, and I have an elderly in-law that I want to give more independence to, but still live with us, I would like to build their own small structure. And heck, I don't need a garage back there. I would like to convert that, make sure it's up to code and everything, but turn that into a living structure for my loved one. And I understand the push and pull of each. I mean, you have to look at investors going into this, and if they're going to use this to create rental properties that propagate all over. But I mean, it's really an expense proposition of that, the same expense proposition people use when they renovate their own homes. One just provides more options. And I think it's good to have a discussion of what the pros and cons of both are, and for council in this community to decide whether we should do both approaches, attached or detached, or start with attached units. So and through the presentation I anticipate that Director Leinecker is going to do is going to fully explain the benefits of the attached units. And I think that change, if this is passed as is, that's a huge win for the city, I feel. That's going to provide a lot of people an opportunity to age in place, to build those first floor masters if they're having trouble with mobility, so they don't have to move out just yet if they have the funds to do it. But I would like to be a little more aggressive to see what we can bear here. And I'm interested in hearing all sides of it. But yeah, that's
Very, very good. Thank you. So, okay, so we look forward to any potential amendment that you would like to offer. I'll state for the record, I'm open. I'm wide open. I consider myself in the learning mode. I've got some real estate experience, but I'm not the professional either from a legal or a business sense that many others are. So I view it as my job to learn and help make it a thoughtful decision. But we're at the beginning of that, so I welcome your thought. I also appreciate your leadership in proposing some meaningful and innovative, challenges, approaches to the way things have been done recently. I also will observe, the concept of a double has come like a pendulum swinging back from one end of the spectrum to the other. When I first started serving on City Council in 2008, doubles, really before I arrived, were considered, oh, geez, we're not sure we like these things. We want to convert doubles to singles. We have too many of them. Nowadays, we're really scarce for open residential, for real estate of all kinds, whether you're talking commercial real estate or residential. So we see prices going up. I know a lot of council members have heard loud and clear concerns about rising prices. On the other hand, property owners who have increased value and have more equity, more ability to invest in their property. So these things are all probably trade-offs. They're positives that come with them, with cost to them. I think we can all agree that declining property values are not good for a number of respects. We don't have that situation today in Lakewood after a lot of hard work from private property owners, from businesses, and from city government as well. And the schools, we should credit for their investment in our school system, which is always a foundation of a strong community. So that's a big proviso. Approach this with an open mind. But it sounds as if I'm going to, actually, I won't delay this further. I'm going to look for the original letter and see if I can call it up on this screen, because I think the introductory letter explained the policy priorities that this proposal envisions. Other council members? Councilwoman Keppel?
Thank you, and thank you, Councilman Schachtner, for your leadership on this issue and the Planning Department for their work on this. I had the opportunity to hear from another number of residents over the weekend on this topic, and I think one of the concerns that I heard from a lot was, I think, a little confusion about the emergency language included in the resolution. And so I wondered if, I don't know if Councilman Schachtner or Director Langer, if you want to talk about if we feel like we need to include the emergency language. It sounds like we're going to have a pretty deliberative process here, or what our thoughts are about that.
Just for the public, and this comes up too in my day job in the city of Cleveland. Emergency language, you will see almost every ordinance passed in most councils, governments have emergency language. All that means is it goes into effect when passed. That's all it means. Because typically, I'd have to look at our charter. Someone else could remind me. Usually, it's how many, Maureen? 40 days. Okay. Without the emergency, if we took the emergency language out, all that means is it will pass. It becomes effective in 40 days. The emergency language just means it's effective when it's passed. It's enacted when it's passed. There are some in our charter, it requires a finding. That's why the emergency language is there. It's about the how the city functions. I think it is rational because the city, I mean, we have things in front of BZA right now that wouldn't need to be in front of BZA if this ordinance is in effect. So for people that are trying to do improvements on their property right now, waiting another 40 days for it to be enacted, once it is voted on, which could be who knows when, that just adds to time and expense. So, but I've also seen with zoning type code changes, for example, it may, in some circumstances, may behoove the administration or the city as a whole. I won't just say the administration, because they actually do the work, the administration here. They have to implement things. That when you have a zoning change, to give them a little runway to get set up and to be able to put in the regulations and policies and priorities they need to do in order to implement these type of ordinances, you don't have that type of language. So they have the 40 days to be like, okay, we're going to be ready for this once these applications come in. So that's all the emergency thing ordinance means. That language does throw people off because it makes it seem like it's unique, but actually it would be unique if the emergency language was not in the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, if I can. Yeah, thank you. And I think that that point of confusion is that, that I've heard from some of the public is that the emergency language does not make our process any faster in terms of when we would vote whether or not to pass this ordinance. In fact, we, as Councilman Bullock mentioned, this is also in front of Planning Commission currently, and so it is not on the docket for tonight's regular council meeting, where it would have to be, it has to go before regular council to actually become law. So even if this committee were to recommend it tonight for adoption, it could not become law tonight. So just for that point of clarification, but I guess to Councilman Schachtner's point about whether it's better to enact to reduce strain on BZA and Planning Commission, or whether emergency, or whether it's better to give the administration a little runway, since Planning Department is of the administration and recommended the emergency language. I'm assuming that you prefer the quick enactment, but I'd be interested in hearing from Director Leininger or whoever else from the administration would like to speak on that.
Mr. Director, I do want to hear, I'm sure you've got some comments to make. I'm hoping to get other council members first, so if we can answer that. And I've also, just so people can see, maybe council members can't see, but I'm highlighting the provisos in the original letter to help us refresh our memories. Thanks. Go ahead, Director.
As far as the emergency clause, I think Councilman Schachtner summarized it very well. It really is just the procedural language. Doesn't change the process that leads up to that actual action by City Council to approve, modify, or in some cases deny the item that's in front of them. It simply is there to allow it to go into effect right away. The point being that there are some applications that from time to time end up in front of our other boards and commissions, particularly our BZA, when we're dealing with lot coverage or height issues. This doesn't pertain to height, but lot coverage in this case. It allows us to perhaps pull those back from BZA and help expedite the review of their applications. So that's the reason for it.
Anything further? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just seeking clarity if that is the preference, or whether it is something that.
It's typically our preference for that reason, but if it's council's wish to wait 40 days, we can wait 40 days. Again, this isn't a race, it's a marathon, so if we need to wait 40 days, we'll wait 40 days.
Okay, Councilman, any further opening?
I'll hold the rest of mine until I think we're going to have a presentation, so I'll hold.
Okay, how about other council members?
Well, just real quick, just speaking of marathons, the Boston Marathon was today, and Ward 2 resident Laura Hunter, who qualified for it, ran it in 3 hours and 20 minutes. So that's
Wow.
something.
Incredible. Okay, other council members? Okay, and Councilwoman Marks or Councilman Shackner, or Rader, rather.
Yeah, I didn't know this presentation. That's great. I'll hold my questions. Thank you.
Great. So, Director, I don't know how long your presentation is. You and I haven't had a chance to communicate beforehand, but I want to make sure we have time on the back end for public comment.
So I was going to keep it pretty high level, recognizing that
great.
this has to come back to you because of the planning commission has to review it. So I was going to stay pretty high level, if you don't mind. And you
Sure.
can answer any questions you have.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's not coming back. Maybe I can pull it up here. Yeah. I wonder if that computer shut up there. I think that computer shut off again. Well, we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty here. Basically, the presentation was to walk you through from a high level, a lot of the information that was contained in the cover letter. Also, some of the terminology. You're going to hear a lot about the word, did it shut off? You're going to hear a lot the word ADU, accessory dwelling unit. You're also going to hear the words in-law suite. This is about more than just those types of units, but that's primarily what we're talking about. And accessory dwelling units are essentially, they are second units that are on a property that has a primary structure. They're generally smaller. They come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Sometimes they're attached, sometimes they're detached, sometimes they're in the basement, sometimes they're in the attic, sometimes they're in addition. There's a lot of different ways that they come. Based on the conversations we've been having to date, going back to 2019, probably even earlier than that with the Resiliency Task Force and some other boards, commissions, council committees. Decided I wanted to update while we're sitting here, so that's always fun. Based on some of those conversations, I wouldn't say we're just dipping the toe in the water. We already have ADUs here in the community. So we're actually taking a pretty big step into allowing accessory dwellings and in-law suites more with some of these code changes, recognizing that, yes, there's a lot of other things that we could do with this type of unit, whether that be detached structures, as Councilman Shackner has mentioned, whether that's changing our parking requirement, and eliminating the need for a garage space and allowing that garage to be converted for an ADU. Allowing another unit to be placed on the property. I can't type a password at the same time and talk, so bear with me. Am I? Is that what? There we go. So they come a lot of different shapes and sizes, but right now we want to take that initial step to do four things, I should say. When we started this conversation, we were talking a lot about affordability. So those types of unit structures that present opportunities for affordability, recognize that there's certainly always a cost associated with these types of units. Allow agent in place, so that first floor, master, bath, bedroom addition, maybe enlarging the kitchen to make it more accessible or doing some other improvements on the first floor. Allowing for shared living arrangements. And by shared living, I'm referring to, here we go. When mom and dad maybe move home or son or daughter move home to live back with the family, to create that space that's still part of the primary structure but separate. But then also in doing all of that, maintaining the character of the neighborhoods as we know them today. In our assessment, as we looked at this and we had conversations, not just with council and boards and commission members, but members with the community, looking back at BZA cases and other cases that have been in front of our boards, we did have some concerns that when we start to look at some of these other things, not that maybe the city's, it's not right for the city, but it just simply wasn't the right time based on where we are in the assessment that we had. Because when we start to now remove parking restrictions, when we start to allow second structures to be built on properties or even third structures if there's a detached garage, Now we're starting to change, we felt we were starting to change the character of the neighborhood a little bit. And so we want to be more cautious, a little bit more protective of that, and take this step first and see where we go, and then revisit from there. So I'm going to back up just for a second. Now the PowerPoint's up. So I mentioned ADUs. They come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Here's some examples. In Lakewood, most garages are detached, or we do have some attached. And so I did make the distinction here. And really what, there we go. So then really what we're focusing on are those that are attached, whether it's a new addition, whether it's on the attic floor, whether it's in the basement floor, really not focusing on those detached opportunities, or even garage conversions when that garage is detached from the structure. Again, Lakewood does have ADUs now. We have the R2 district, allows both single and two-family dwellings. However, we do have this unique restriction in our code that was placed in 1966. So in the cover letter that's associated with this, there's over 8,000 parcels that are zoned A2 or R2, of which about 6,000 of them only have a single-family structure on them. This section, which is in our additional district regulations, Chapter 1133, basically says anywhere where there's a single-family dwelling in the city, you cannot expand it to be more than one unit. So really, where that affects and comes into play primarily is in the R2 district, where if you have a single-family home, it cannot be converted to a two-family home. In fact, as someone noted earlier, the city, in fact, had a policy at one point in time, or a program where we helped convert duplexes to single-family homes. And now we've reached a point in time where we're trying to actually do the opposite for the reasons cited on the previous slide. The in-law suite I mentioned, so an in-law suite is basically, it's a home within a home. They share entrances and exits, but it really has its own, it's maybe a room or a couple rooms that may have its own kitchen facilities, living quarters. In-law suites can be permitted, but they get to be, they're permitted right now, but they're very difficult to implement because of our lot coverage restrictions that are in place. If someone doesn't have accessible space, an attic that has clear enough height in it, or a basement that can be finished reasonably. So this is the zoning map. Everything that's in blue here is R2 zoning. Everything else that's kind of in those blues, the keys down here on the right. Most of our city is zoned R2, so almost a little over 50% of the city is zoned R2. Everything else is kind of in between, is all the R1, high density, low density, and medium density residential zoning in the city. This is a breakdown of all those lots. So again, this is just kind of reaffirming some of that language you saw in the cover letter, where most of our lots in the city, almost 50%, are zoned R2, of which around 6,000 have, and I don't have that slide up here, of which about 6,000 of those have a single-family home on them. So unlocking the ability of those 6,000 units to potentially take on, if a property owner wanted to do that, could take on a second unit. And so that's the first part of the code amendments that we have to unlock that R2 capacity. The other thing that we're trying to do is unlock some of the lot coverage requirements or ability that's within the code. So these are looking at some standard lots in the R2 and R1 and R2 districts. You can see what the minimum lot size is based on our lot frontage and lot area would be. When you start to map out all the setbacks, and the front setback varies based on where you are in the city, but generally if you look at this and you apply the setbacks to these lots, this is essentially the building envelope. This dark gray box is the building envelope that you end up with. Where we often run into variances is in the lot coverage for this primary structure being capped at 25%. The rear setbacks and side setbacks would actually allow the development of this area of the property. However, the lot coverage restriction doesn't allow you to utilize or access that additional land that's on your property that otherwise would meet all the setback requirements. And so what we're proposing with the increase from 25% to 35% of the primary lot structure or primary lot coverage is to basically unlock for the R2 and R1 high densities lots to unlock 500 square feet of additional property that could be utilized for first floor masters, or in the R2 district, could be utilized for a second unit that's attached to the structure. In the R1M and R1L, this would be more for in-law suites or aged in place to unlock another 950 square feet or 1,500 square feet in those larger lots is what we're proposing with this. And I'll also make sure I get this to the clerk so it can be part of your documents as well. We did do some comparisons looking around at different West Side communities, but then we often, as we look around the communities, we look at Shaker Heights and Cleveland Heights to see what they're doing. Cleveland Heights actually doesn't have a restriction. There's pros and cons with that too, as far as impervious area and how do you deal with that. But you can kind of see everybody's kind of all over the place as far as it's 50% for all structures. Sometimes it's just the primary structure, sometimes the accessory structure. So what we did find though overall is that we actually had less, even though we're the densest city in Ohio, we actually had less lot coverage than a lot of other communities around us. So that's really all this slide is showing. So again, with this, I just want to kind of present this. This is in front of the Planning Commission. They will, by statute, they will give you a recommendation that council can follow. With the supermajority of city council, you can also go beyond or change that recommendation, not follow that recommendation. So that'll happen hopefully at their May 4th meeting. Unless they needed some additional time, then we'll bring that back to you as soon as they give a recommendation. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Director. I'm going to jump the line and just a couple of clarifying questions to kind of MC the informational download here. Can you go, well, let me start with here. All right, so the increase from 25% to 35%, is it your view or your calculation, rather, that if we accept existing setbacks as the maximum and nobody proposes to change setbacks, that therefore the extra 10% proposed in the current proposal before us would cover? In other words, we don't need 9%, we don't need 11%, 10% hits it on the nose?
Using a minimum lot size, yes, it hits it on the nose. It also gives us a square footage. When you look at the square footages that are here, 500 square feet is a pretty sizable square footage for an addition. So we felt comfortable with the 10%.
Okay, and go ahead.
Just to clarify, this is also a primary structure. This is not changing anything related to the accessory structure.
Right, the proposal before us, in
The
other words.
proposal
Okay,
before you,
and there was
correct.
some discussion before you gave your presentation that there could be a proposal to do that, but right now, we're not talking about that.
Correct.
We're looking at this slide at only the primary structure, and we're understanding that the setbacks could accommodate an additional 10% and still not change. Let me ask you just a different question. If we did an audit today of compliance with where homes are actually built, you know, the lot coverage, are we in compliance? You know, I mean, my home was built in 1907. I don't know. Now, I assume everybody's grandfathered in, but I'm just curious as to where the 25% came from. Has it evolved or jumped around over the years? Have people, as they say, Uncle Frank their way into something different? You know, Uncle Frank built the back porch on my house, and there's no insulation, and it's hard to fix
So
in
we
the
did-
50s.
So we did, planning staff did do an analysis. Michelle Knox is really helping lead this. They did do an analysis of some spots throughout the community. And when the 25% was derived, it was not without looking, at least from what we can tell, not without looking at the community, because most of the community is compliant with the 25% requirement.
Okay, so
Are there
largely-
anomalies out there? Yes, absolutely, just
Okay.
like with the setbacks.
In both directions, anomalies?
Yeah,
Do we
both.
vary from 25% under in some cases?
Most of them are under, yeah.
Okay,
Most
really?
lots are compliant. And by and large, most lots are compliant.
Okay, so most lots are under 25%
Most lots are under
currently. Okay.
25%.
And do you know when that dates back to? Is that some arbitrary number that was picked out when the code was first developed or amended at some point along the way, or that's a research project we'd have to
That's a
have
research
fun
project. The
doing?
most recent major code overhaul was in 1996. I suspect that's when the current 25%, whether that was carried
Okay.
forward from a previous code without doing research, I don't know.
So we've got a 25% standard in there right now, which kind of recognizes current reality. And that may have really been driven by what property developers did in 1907, well, '04 through 1924, something like that, right? Okay, interesting to know. If we could, can we go back a slide? How about another, keep going. All right, parcels by district. So the current proposal would really focus on R2, which is the top line, is also the most numerous parcel in the city. Is that accurate? Because
It is.
we're covering the larger multifamilies, but they're fewer in number, even if they have higher density. And then in your letter, which isn't currently explained on screen, but I can read it from the March 20 docket, it says, in support of aging in place and shared living, single-family districts, R1H, R1M, and R1L, on this slide, that's the next three lines, all can support, well, they would not, do not permit two separate units. However, a traditional intergenerational in-law suite, which is not a separate dwelling unit, but a suite within, is permitted. So in other words, just to get definitions clear, if we're talking about in-law suites, your view is that a lot of parcels, R2, R1H, R1M, R1L, can all accommodate that legally today with no law change, right? No legal change.
That is correct.
Okay. And then secondly, the proposal that we're considering is for a related but different thing called accessory dwelling units. And if I'm following you, any double in Lakewood has an accessory dwelling unit, is that right?
That's where it's a nomenclature thing.
Okay.
So is it accessory dwelling units or just two dwelling units?
Potato,
So we use
potato.
it kind of interchangeably, but it's
Okay.
two dwelling units. It may be accessory and then it's smaller and subordinate to the main unit, but it's still another dwelling unit.
Okay, okay, thanks. Can you go back one more? All right, so here's the picture. So R1, or R2 is the light blue, including
is.
my own neighborhood, and most of Lakewood. R1L is the dark blue. R1M is the brown in Clifton Park, or
Yeah.
below Clifton Park, and then east of Lakewood Park. And R1H is much of the rest of town, right?
Yeah. The center swath here is really kind of that R1, high-density R1H.
Okay,
R1M and L, yeah, M and L are really north of Clifton,
okay,
on either end of the city.
very good. And if the proposal were to be passed, all it would do is allow private property owners to consider, and well, it could do more than that. They could consider, propose, and then build accessory dwelling units within our current laws. And some or none of those would require presentations and permits from, they would certainly have to get building department
Yes.
permits, but would they have to come before ABR? Or,
ABR, yes, but not BZA,
okay, and not planning commission?
and not planning commission.
Okay. So ABR would deal with the design and the architecture, building department would deal with the safety
Correct.
and the compliance to code,
Yeah,
but there would be no, under the version before us tonight,
Correct.
no lot changes that would involve either the planning commission or BZA.
and again, that was all attached structures. We did not include
Understood.
detached, and there were several reasons for that. And I see Building Commissioner Parmley's walked in, but there's one thing to keep in mind, there's also building code that goes behind this. And so when we talk about existing garages and the ability to just go above them or convert them, most existing garages today are not on a full foundation. In order to have living space.
Can we go back a slide to the?
You now
your-
have to be
your-
on a full foundation, so you're essentially at a tear down.
One more. You have a neat graphic. I thought that was helpful. One more, too,
you
also,
wanna see the
okay.
whole thing? Okay.
Yeah, because this, I think, is helpful, showing little monopoly house
Yeah.
diagrams. So we're talking about potentially, to me, I always thought of above the garage, the middle bottom picture as being an accessory dwelling unit, or I suppose the top left, the detached version. But,
What we're finding is that because of the building code change, now those where you have a lot of these single-story garages that are on a slab foundation, in order to be converted to a living space, they need to be on a full foundation. So you're essentially going to tear down and a rebuild. Plus, you have to run all utilities out there. And when we were focused on affordability, and some of those priorities that we're focused on right now,
Sure.
it just didn't fit into
But if
that.
somebody wants to do it, what's wrong with that?
We also, then the flip side of that, so then it's, okay, what is the community telling us about putting two-story structures in a backyard, like a detached garage with living space above?
There's some rules about density and setbacks and
So
all
what
that,
we hear
right?
from the public when we have BZA cases is that the scale, the height, the fact that we're now putting somebody in the back corner of what was maybe 3 private backyards in the back there now we have a living structure in that back corner that is probably taller and of larger size than what would typically be there, even if it was just a storage space
Yeah.
above the garage. We hear a lot of negative feedback from the community at our BZA as a result of that type of.
Not for this, but for other stuff. That's
For
in the
other
current
stuff, yes,
docket,
correct.
like they're putting in a larger garage or
Correct.
a HVAC unit or a pool or
Office
something.
above a garage,
right?
that's a very
Okay.
common thing. Storage above a garage, that's a
Okay.
common thing. That's the type of feedback that we hear.
Okay, so there would be a balancing act to do, but it's not to say that it's entirely impossible to do it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I've run on long. I hope that's been helpful clarifying discussion. Other council members, and we do want to, go ahead, Tristan, and then go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Leininger, for the run-through of that. Just one quick kind of very, very, very high-level question. This 1133.06 that's being repealed, just so I understand completely and 100%, I think I understand it, just so I'm understanding 100%, that currently applies to every zone in Lakewood. So even in multifamily zones, you couldn't take a home currently. Let's say there was a duplex that was converted to a single-family home. I have a friend that lives in one of those. They couldn't reconvert it back, as it were, even though they were zoned multifamily. Okay. And then if this were repealed, it would also apply to single-family home zones, or no?
It
Just
would
R2?
It would not apply to any of the R1, the single-family zoning, because they do not allow, that zoning does not allow more than one unit already.
So our zoning's still in force. This is just an addition that was added at some point.
Correct.
Not too long ago. All right, that really helped me understand this. I really, again, appreciate the hard work, and thank you for the hard work on this over the years, Mr. Shackner and the administration.
I know Councilman Shackner has something. Councilman Baker, you wanted to get in?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting us non-committee members talk. And appreciate, Director Leininger, your presentation. And I think on the lot coverage thing, I think it's probably going to make BZA's docket a little shorter, because I have to imagine that most of the zoning variances come from that. On the singles, the doubles provision, one thing I'd be interested in the administration putting together as you think about your presentation to Planning Commission is other communities that have done this and kind of the volume, because I'm curious, you're unlocking 6,000 housing units potentially to convert. What do we anticipate that looks like? And I know you're probably not going to be able to find a dead ringer case. I mean, Councilman Shackner was talking a little bit about, there's a New York Times article about a community in California, and they approved ADU statewide and required it, that you can't as a local community do that. So kind of the opposite of Ohio in some ways, and how our state government works with us. And you went from having a single-family home to having 4 units or 5 units on a lot, which changes the community pretty drastically. Whether that's good or bad, I think is an argument for folks on different sides can make. But I would be interested in kind of what volume that creates, and how it, what we might expect if it were passed. Because I think that's probably what's highest on most people's minds is the actual effect it would have. Because if you look at it today, and I think Councilman Rader's point was well taken, that if any of these homes that were singles were torn down, they could build a double. Or if any of them burned down and they had to be reconstructed, you could build a double. So it is kind of like a short circuit, this original prohibition, because then it took the zoning district and it said, no, you can't do that. And so, but I am curious about what effect it would have on 50% of our city, which is zoned that way. So would be interested in that conversation before Planning Commission.
Thanks, Mr. Baker. Mr. Shackner?
Thank you. And I also want to recognize Michelle Nocta for all the work that she did. She did a ton of research, spent a lot of time on that at a time where planning department was very, 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 very busy. So thank you, and you could thank her for me. Thank all your staff. I'm not going to make us jump around the PowerPoint, but there was that PowerPoint showing the that slide that showed the 10% and the lot coverage thing. Because another thing that we see, and Tom and I, we talked about this back in 2017. I mean, and this was about, you know, families, you know, you come here, you meet the person you love, you get married, you have, and then you have a kid, and then before you know it, you're over to Rocky River or Westlake because you outgrow your home. I mean, this really allows for homes to grow with families a bit more without the expensive set aside ADUs or in-law suites. This allowing the more maximum lot coverage could allow an addition that could allow another bedroom for a child or a second bathroom. You know, I have a daughter, and if I have another daughter, I know just one bathroom's not going to be enough for all of us. So that's something we're looking at, and that's a reality to a lot of families here, and they have to go out further to the outer ring suburbs in order to accommodate their growing families instead of staying here. So that's one effect. And I think Councilman Baker brings up an interesting point about unlocking 6,000, you know, homes potentially, and we all understand and all see, like, and that's why we want to see some. It's going to be almost impossible to predict, right? Because you're making a couple. You have to make a couple guesses out there, assumptions like how many people are going to put their house on the market, number one. You'd have to see influx of landlords sell their properties already to other investors to then get some money somewhere to invest in their property to create more. What happened in California, you had some of the most restrictive housing policy in counties like San Francisco. They have housing crisis out there because, one, they locked in people's property taxes, so nobody wanted to move or sell their house. And then they didn't allow anybody to build for decades and decades and decades. We don't have necessarily that problem here in Ohio or in Lakewood. And just to keep in mind this, too, in terms of building and things like that, and going back to the affordability question, because that's on top of mind of everybody. Right, becoming this like, why are you doing this? You're not doing some other affordability thing. Why are you talking about this? Well, you talk about one thing at a time. You talk about multiple things at a time. Number one. Number two, it costs the same to build an affordable house as a market rate house. It costs the same. In fact, it probably costs more to build a home here in Lakewood than it would in Chicago, due to supply and labor and things like that. And meanwhile, Midwest, where we're used to, in Ohio, we're used to lower rents. So you're building things sometimes more expensively than in higher price markets for lower return on investment, which creates that issue on top of that. And that has been borne out through several studies throughout the Urban League. HUD has done a number of studies on that. So that's what I would bring up to that. I'd be interested to see what the city comes up with if they can do any prediction, but I think that'd be hard to predict the effect on the market there.
Thank you, Mr. Schachner. Let's go, we're at time, but let's go to public comment. I have one person sign in, Tom Yanks, apologies, Yanks, Tom Yanks. Welcome. Can you make sure your mic is on, sir? You just hit the red button.
There we go.
Awesome.
So you're the one in the middle, any of these on your Mr. Leniger, is the 2,250 square feet, that's the total size of the house, the 2 stories or 2.5 stories? You don't know?
So if you don't mind, please address the chair. Mr. Director, if you could answer. Thanks.
So that is the footprint of the house, is 2,250 square feet. That is not the vertical, so if there's multiple floors, that is only the first floor footprint.
And on your, I'm sorry, I'm.
Same thing for
adjusting.
all of them.
Yeah, it's okay.
What's the depth of that lot?
The middle one, the minimum with a 60, so the minimum is 60 feet of frontage. The minimum area is 9,000, so that would arrive at 150 feet deep.
So there's, for me, there's been a lot of confusion as to what's going on because I was reading and the only thing I really saw was this news article and it talked about building these tiny houses or putting on houses on top of garages and doing some other things. And then Mr. Leninger kind of clarified it for me today. So my anxiety level went down because he said it's only attached. And I thought, well, that's good because I have no problem with expanding for, you know, aging in place, and that makes sense, and the whole bathroom thing for kids and everything. But then my anxiety level went way back up when Mr. Schachtner started talking about people don't use their garages, and we could just, you know, convert those into living arrangements. But, you know, what about all the stuff that people put in those garages because they can't park their cars? Now we got to start putting sheds out. There's no parking, so now people are going to start parking on their lawns or in their driveways, or worse, the streets are already filled with parking. So that's an issue. So I'm back to being concerned again because it sounds to me like this is phase one and you guys are going to try and slip in something on phase two. My other concern is why are we putting this all on the homeowners? You know, we have the Barry Buick site that's empty and that's been sitting for years. So why can't we do affordable housing there? You've got the hospital site that's a hole in the ground that's been that way for quite some time. Why can't we address that? What's wrong with the old Board of Education property? Maybe we could expand there. There seems to be other opportunities to do that. Another concern I have is I can walk down my street and I can identify, and this is slightly different, but it'll be a follow-up to it. I can identify houses that are in disrepair, that are in building code violations, and nothing gets done. And I have houses on my street that have been like that for years. There's a house with a vacant car. There's all kinds of issues. And now we're going to put more rental property on homes. And then the ability for the city, for whatever reason, I'm sure they're trying as hard as they can, but for whatever reason, those things don't get addressed. You talked about the maintaining the character of the, as we know it today. This will change the character as we know it today. This is in Boston, this is in New York City, where we can have multiple story rental property everywhere, no parking, no garages, none of those things. That's not us, we're a city of homes. I guess I would leave you with, if you're gonna put the screws to the R2 community, do it to everybody. Change the R1s too. Let everybody benefit. Let Clifton Park benefit from all of this. With that, I will end my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for coming to share your thoughts. And I guess I would like to understand, so it sounds like your concerns, if I hear you correctly, because I would like to make sure any proposal that goes through the committee does a good job of addressing people's concerns. It sounds like you view this as harmful to housing quality and maybe adding to parking problems. Is that your core of
My
it?
concern is more rental income, absentee landlords, landlords that don't take care of their properties now. I've been living in this community for over 40 years, and that's been a problem since before I even moved in here. It's
Yep.
always been a discussion. Every time there's a council race or a mayoral race, hey, we got to address these absentee landlords. We got to take care of our housing properties. This is going to add to the problem. So I am fully against adding more rental income on the homeowners in single homes to existing structures. That's what I'm against.
Understood.
If you want to build lower income properties, more affordable properties on some of the vacant properties we have, or develop other sites, hey, I'm all for that because I'm all for that part of it.
Understood.
I just don't think you should put the burden on the existing homeowners. I bought my house. When I looked at my house, I wanted to be in a single family area. I have doubles on my street, I have no problem with that, but I look for a house, and now my neighbors, if they decided to move, somebody mentioned before moving, because they're too small, they move to Westlake or Rocky River, and they convert their houses into a rental, and all of a sudden they're tearing their garages down and building, and I'm stuck, and I
Okay.
don't want to see that.
Okay, and we're at time. I do want to just conclude with saying thanks again.
Sure.
I do know that developments are on the way for all those larger properties you mentioned. The
Well, that's
property,
good news.
they're waiting out the inflation and the tough economy, but they're on the way. I guess I think from hearing my colleagues, the spirit of the proposal is that this would be a positive for property owners, not a negative. And it sounds like from your view.
It's a negative.
Okay.
It's a negative. I don't see how it's a positive. It's a positive for a guy who converts his house to a double and then moves, but it's not going to be and I get the expanding if you have a age in place. I get that. I'm all for that. That makes a
Understood.
lot of sense.
Okay, well, to be continued. I appreciate the dialogue. Thank you to Acting President Keppel for her generosity on the timeframe. Without objection,
I have objection.
okay.
25 seconds.
One objection, how can we make it 15? Because I've already stepped on her toes, the council's toes. Go ahead.
No, I really appreciate the comments, and it goes to the larger conversation that we're having here. Now, if we decide to expand the legislation, it won't be done quietly, it won't be done slipped in, it would be done loudly and proudly, because I mean, I'm talking about families that have approached me that have their parent has Alzheimer's and they want to give them a little space to live instead of putting them in a home. I'm talking about people that have a disabled child that they want to live with and still give some independence. That child's never going to live on their own. There are provisions to protect against rental properties and things like that. There are ways to do it, but I see those as two separate. We're trying to address one thing here. It's not going to solve all problems, and we are a place of homes. Lakewood is the city of homes. I see no objection to adding more.
Thank you. Without objection, we are adjourned.